I was a young, innocent little girl, taking an annual summer trip to visit her grandmother in Ocean City, expecting a fun-filled week. For a week every summer, I visit my grandparents at their house that sits on the edge of a glimmering blue lake that sparkles in the sunlight, expecting nothing but my grandmother's mouth-watering home-cooked meals in her kitchen and the daily trips to my grandfather's favorite restaurant, the Atlantic Hotel. I knew the week would be nothing but fabulous. One day, I hopped in the car with my grandmother to pick up something from the doctor's. She told me everything was fine, but she needed to pick up a prescription from one of the nurses. My grandmother has battled daily with diabetes and high blood pressure. She has also suffered a stroke and survived cancer 3 times. To help with the pains of chemotherapy and the pain of her stroke, she was prescribed oxycodone, a pain reliever that numerous cancer patients are prescribed after undergoing chemotherapy and intensive surgeries. After dropping off the prescription at the pharmacy, we returned back to our house where she sat me down at the kitchen table. I didn't know much about these drugs and painkillers. All I knew was that they helped people like my grandmother from feeling pain. My aunt, who has a sinus and knee problems, underwent surgeries for both and was given a couple of medicines to help her with the pain, including oxycodone. My Aunt Julie went to 2 separate doctors, one for her knees and one for her sinuses. Sadly, these doctors did not communicate. After finishing my breakfast one morning, my grandmother sat me down at the kitchen table to tell me something. By the look on my grandmother's face, I knew something had happened. She seemed to search for words that wouldn't make sense to a 13-year-old. When our eyes met, I knew she seemed worried about my reaction to what she was about to tell me. Aunt Julie has a problem, she began. The reason we went to my doctor's office was to pick up her prescription for my pain medicine that your aunt is addicted to. Since she has only restricted amounts prescribed to her, she has been stealing mine lately, leaving no medication for me. My grandmother sighed of anxiety. She didn't know how well I would take this. Your mother and I talked last night and decided that you had a right to know what was going on. We were not telling your brothers because they are too young, but we thought you were old and mature enough to be aware of the situation. As my grandmother continued, I zoned out, dazed and confused by this news. As a 13-year-old girl, I didn't know how to react to this. She told me everything was going to be okay, but that didn't change what I thought. Hearing this, I now viewed my aunt as a thief and was scared that in my absence, she would take my belongings too. I learned that the combination of medicines that my aunt was prescribed offsetted, causing her to form an addiction to both, which included oxycodone. My aunt and grandmother, only living 15 minutes apart, were very close. My grandmother owned a school that my aunt helped run and would become the owner of when my grandmother passed. However, this tight-knit relationship crumbled within a matter of days. Knowing that my grandmother took these same painkillers, my aunt was urging to have them. I could only imagine my aunt entering through the garage door, which was accessible due to the lack of my grandmother locking up her house. My aunt told my younger cousin Gavin that she was going into my grandmother's house to use the bathroom, but that wasn't quite the wholesome truth. Traveling up the steep staircase that led right to my grandmother's bedroom, all happening while my grandmother, grandfather, and I were out at our daily lunch at the Atlantic. My grandmother decided she was going to lock up her medicine in a small safe. We hopped into my grandmother's small cherry red Mercedes-Benz and drove to the local Walmart. While there, we picked out a black safe about the size of a shoebox with white buttons that gleamed red upon pressing them. After purchasing it and returning home, we sat down at her oak kitchen table to open our new safe. We opened the white cardboard packaging, revealing a black safe about the size of a shoebox wrapped in bubble wrap and a white piece of paper with black print labeled Instructions. What are you going to set the code as, Nana? I'm not sure yet, but it needs to be a combination that is easy for me to remember, but impossible for my Aunt Julie to crack. My grandmother responded. My grandmother and I thought long and hard about a combination. After finally coming to an agreement, we set the 8-digit code, my dad and both my uncles' birthdays. As my grandmother read the instructions aloud, I precisely followed them in order to set the code. After the safe beeped, I entered in the code we had created, which lighted up the white keypad with red lights. She placed her medicine in the black cushion lining, firmly closed the safe, and entered the code to lock it. At this moment, I had finally been struck with the reality of the situation. An innocent girl was experiencing the first tragedy of her life, and change was going to occur thereafter. The relationships in my family were built and strengthened for years as my grandparents welcomed in 3 daughter-in-laws and 8 grandchildren. My family had a strong support system, like the foundation of a house, but with all houses, they wear with age, causing the foundation to crack and deteriorate, leaving voids that needed to be filled. After the situation with my aunt, our family foundation crumbled. These cracks and breaks grew larger and became more harmful to the foundation. The issue growing larger and affecting more than just my aunt and uncle, but now my cousins and grandparents too. I have not seen or spoken to my aunt since the incident, except for the bittersweet happy birthday text I send her every year on her birthday. She is still my aunt, always has been and always will be. The thought of her is bittersweet every time she replies, leaving an image inside my head, imagining what it would be like if this had never happened. After this life-changing period in my life, I realized I could learn from my aunt's mistakes. I learned that when you're taking multiple medications, you should always be careful about the quantity of the dosage and frequency in which you're consuming them. Whenever I have a doctor's appointment, my doctor asks me what medications I take. This made me come to a realization of how important it is to acknowledge your doctor of this information. This is so incidents like my aunt's won't happen to me. When consuming medications in irregular amounts, they cause addictions. I also learned that friends come and go, but family is forever. So we really need to cherish the relationships and time we spend with our family members, because in an instant, a mistake can happen and the relationship will vanish.